It's my pleasure to introduce Elise. She's a retired occupational safety and health professional. She's worked for 25 years for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Fortunately, we live in Massachusetts and we still have a Department of Public Health. She also worked as a ninth grade science teacher and as a steel worker, and she has studied medicine. So, with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Elise Pector right now.
Uh, Hi, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the invitation. I see some familiar faces, and I'm hoping, even in just the three sections, if there are some compelling things you want to talk about, please interrupt me. With that, I'm going to share slides. So I'm going to be smaller, but I actually want to start with some questions. So let me see if my slides will advance. Yeah. Yeah. Right now, my slide is not advancing. Let's see if this works. All right. So if you can unmute, tell me one thing you know about heat stress and heat strain, and one thing you would like to know more about, so I can tailor what I'm going to present. So does anyone want to unmute and tell me one thing you know about heat stress and strain? Go ahead, Martha, please.
It's very hard for older people, and many older people have died when there is a big heat wave in all sorts of places all over the world. As far as I know, there were many people who died, I mean, thousands in Europe a few years ago when there was a terrible heat wave in Europe. So it's a bad thing for older people.
Go ahead, Edwina.
I was going to say that I'm actually working on a committee that is dealing with artificial turf in high schools and in school settings, because in the summer it accumulates a whole lot of heat and children are getting burned, and they're also getting hotter than they need to be when they're, you know, participating in sports on these fields. So that is a form of heat stress that we are subjecting our students to and our teams to.
Great, great. Hadn't even thought about that one. Anyone else want to jump in with something you do know or want to know?
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Dale.
I'd like to know, what do you do? How do you avoid this if you don't have access to air conditioning and it's really hot out?
All right. Well, with I guess with all this, let's go on and see if we can address all of these and more. So what I kind of pictured is these three sections.
Andre, you have your hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Andre.
Thank you. To be blunt, I have met more than one older person who does not want to continue to drink water in hot situations when they should be drinking water because they have either trouble getting to the bathroom or they've got limited disability, disabilities prevent that. So it's a practical question. How do we deal with that? Thanks.
Great, thank you. And if I forget any of these, please remind me as we go on. So I was thinking the first part is really, what is heat stress, heat strain, who's at risk, where does it come from, what can we do, kind of more on an individual basis. The second part is kind of, where is this all coming from? What is climate change, global warming? How does it affect us? And then third, what can we do? I mean, some of it is the practical. How do we take steps, whether it's artificial turf or drinking more water, or what are the organizations that are working on this that we can work with? So let's keep these in mind as we go forward. Yeah, for some reason, It doesn't like to advance. See if I can do something to make it go forward. I don't know, Anne Marie, you may have to do this.
Well, if you want to stop sharing, I'll see if I can get this going on
Okay.
my end.
Yeah, right now my mouse isn't even letting me get to stop sharing. Oh, now it advanced.
Oh, because I'm
Let's-
sharing now. Can you-
Ah. All right. Technical difficulties, huh?
can you guys see the screen?
Shall I try again to start sharing, or looks like you've got it?
Do you have it? Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yeah, we can.
Okay,
You can see.
then go
my
ahead.
screen?
Just, no,
Did-
you can see my screen.
All right.
We see a graph that says a cautionary tale from a heat wave.
There it is. All right. When the first comment was about deaths from heat stress, this is one of the stories that really affected me. In 1995 in Chicago, there were 739 heat-related deaths over 5 days. Most of the victims of that heat wave were older, poor residents of the city who didn't have air conditioning, or they had air conditioning, but they couldn't afford to turn it on, or they didn't feel safe opening their windows or sleeping outside for fear of crime. 739 people. They had to actually bring in refrigerated trucks to allow the bodies to be kept from affecting the whole city. And that same heat wave, again, only 1995 in Milwaukee, killed another 148 people. Most of those happened on one day, July 15th. The median age in Milwaukee was 76. So this is kind of telling you kind of who's affected and how serious this can be. And you'll see on the left, if you can still see the slide, there's a number of different things that happen with heat strain. They can vary from just a rash to cramps, to exhaustion. There's heat dizziness. They call it syncope. And then it goes on to the life-threatening things like heat stroke and heat exhaustion. So next slide, Anne Marie. And I'll see if I can see the same thing you're seeing. Yep. I don't know. I am seeing my slide instead of yours.
Which one, do you want the face with heat stroke, heat exhaustion?
Now, why can't I see the same slide you're showing, since that would make a difference too? Let's see. Can I try sharing again and see if we can make this work?
Sure. Go ahead. There you go.
Yeah, is that working?
Yep.
All right. This was just a nice table that I thought would kind of talk about from the least severe to the most severe, kind of what it is, and then what you should do. And the main thing to look at here is it's not exactly one comes after the other. Say again?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Heat rash, heat cramps, and heat fainting can all occur one after another at the same time or different time. In all of those cases, the main thing to do is move to a cooler area, less humid area. The whole idea is when the body starts overheating, you need to find ways to dissipate that heat. So the advice is kind of concrete and down to earth. Move to a cooler place, sip cool water, be someplace where there's a breeze. When you start getting into heat exhaustion or heat stroke, those are the really severe and very dangerous conditions. And that's when the advice is call for medical help and life-threatening emergency. So the main idea here is to know what can go wrong and when you're in real trouble. And now it's not letting me down. Advance again. All right. This is just a reminder of the two very serious heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And heat, it's kind of counterintuitive. Heat exhaustion, people are still sweating. They have moist, clammy skin. You know, your temperature may not have gone into the dangerous range yet. Once you get to heat stroke, which is the most severe, the skin becomes dry and the body temperature starts going up independent of anything you're doing. And this is really life-threatening. So I kind of, just to be a reminder about the terms kind of using. Heat stress is what happens to us. Heat strain is the body's reaction. And heat-related illnesses are all those bad things that can occur. The rash, the dizziness, the heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. And heat by itself causes illness, but heat stress is also related to increased injuries. And you can imagine, if you're dizzy, if you're distracted, if you're sweating, the risk of injury is also greater. So there might be other injuries like falls that we are related to heat. We may not even recognize that they're a heat-related injury or illness. And why is that happening? Well, it could be fatigue, it could be dehydration. As Andre suggested, some people don't even drink water that they need to. It could be that people, yes, I see, good, Dale. Yeah, inadequate acclimatization. In other words, our body actually learns how to deal with heat. And so we try and get it kind of introduced to heat a little bit at a time. It could be cardiovascular. You know, our heart and blood systems are what help dissipate heat. So these can contribute to injury as well as heat illness. So this is actually, there was a very good government heat source called heat.gov that talks about how heat affects us. And they really look at who's at risk. And that risk can come by who's exposed to heat. You know, where do we run into heat? By age and by underlying condition. And that's kind of getting at what I think we started talking about. Why are the elderly more at risk? Who else might be at risk and why? And so you can see in this list, it's both the very young and older and pregnant individuals. It's people who work outside, homelessness, athletes who are doing physical activity under warm conditions, emergency responders, people with certain chronic health conditions, as I said, cardiovascular problems might put you at greater risk for heat stress because your body isn't responding appropriately to dissipate that heat. Same thing, diabetes affects your cardiovascular system, your blood flow, and that can also contribute to it, and people with disabilities. So that heat.gov might be a good place to go to look for more information, but I wanted to warn you. These are all the agencies that work together to put together that heat.gov website, which is very complete. But yesterday, NIOSH just got closed. NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. It's in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. CDC has been decimated. NIOSH is closed. OSHA, which you see here, just closed its Andover office. It's one of the 3 OSHA offices in Massachusetts, area offices. So while heat.gov is up and available and has excellent information now, it's just like FEMA also is being reduced. We are at risk of losing some of our best and most comprehensive guidance on what to do about heat stress. All right, come on, advance. No, it's not letting me advance again. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I tried to answer this question, why are older people at greater risk of heat? You know, is it something about aging? So there's actually an article that just came out this year. It's got a really horrible long name, but if you're interested in it, it's by Choi and Aylshire, and this reference is at the end. It's age-related declines in thermoregulatory functions. Anyway, what it asks is, it does a study of older people and says, what's going on with heat stress in older people? And so they did a study, a pretty good size. Average age was 69. And they did in fact find that older people had less capacity to deal with heat. So it means they're not sweating as well, their circulation isn't as good. Thirst doesn't give them enough warning that they need more water. And as it turns out, it's actually affecting our DNA. It's not just little pieces, that people who are in heat waves more actually see the effects because of effects on their DNA. So it's not our imagination. It's actually something that people are studying. And this is a gerontologist who actually did this study. And he found that being exposed to prolonged heat waves, it's like the effects of smoking and drinking on the human body. So there's a reason why we're suffering. Once again, yeah. You know, every so often my computer's not letting me advance the slides. And I may have to ask you again, Anne Marie, to take over, see if I can.
Can you hit the space bar?
Yeah, you would think that would do it. So once again, you may have to take the sharing away from me. Yep, my computer isn't allowing me, so if you can take it over. All right. And now what are you all seeing?
The map of the US.
Okay, so now I can't see what you're seeing, but I can see you all. All right, this is actually from the same article, and I don't think there's that much to say, except they were proving that it's a global it's a national problem. This is kind of showing from a heat index perspective. Yeah, I can't see what you're seeing, but I have it here. Heat index is a combination of temperature and humidity. Remember, I said that dissipating the heat is really important. So when there's high humidity, you don't get evaporative cooling. So what ends up happening is the heat's coming in, but you're not able to cool your body off. So what those maps were showing that they looked at the heat days over a 7-year period, and then they tried to look at how it's changing over time and how much more of the country it's starting to affect. So you can't compare the maps to each other, but it's showing that even if you looked at caution, extreme caution, or the highest emergency level, it's starting to affect more of the country and getting worse as time goes on. So if you can move to the next slide. All right, are you seeing heat stress? Great. So we were talking about strain, the effects on the body. We have to really look at, if we want to control it, what causes those effects on the human body. So what's leading to these high temperatures? Obviously the sun. If you're in direct sun, that's a real effect on the human body. Besides just the ambient temperature, there's also radiant heat. People who work with ovens or furnaces or kilns, or who work on road surfaces, who are working or spending time around a heat source. Then there's low air movement. You're being exposed to heat and there's no cooling. There's no way to get rid of that heat from the body by evaporation. The humidity itself, and then any activity you're doing yourself. Remember, you saw athletes were at risk of heat stress. Any strenuous physical activity actually adds to the heat strain on the body. So that's a source of heat. All right, again, next slide. Okay. And I think you should be seeing a poster, right? Great, and I think this one's from the World Health Organization. And this is kind of just going over the general terms, what are the sources of heat? What are the things that can go wrong? And, what are when do you need medical assistance when those things go wrong? Okay, next slide again. All right, you're seeing words again, stay out of the sun. All right, so in other words, if you are in a situation where you're being exposed to heat stress and you're trying to reduce that strain on your body, there are some guidance activities that you should do. And some of it is pretty straightforward. Stay out of the sun, stay hydrated, reduce strenuous activity, cool your body. If you start getting into trouble, you see the heat rash, you start feeling dizzy, lightheaded, you find ways to cool yourself off, cool compresses, a cool shower, loosen clothing, take off shoes and socks. Seems pretty straightforward, but it's helping the body get the excess heat away from the body. And then it kind of goes on to the practical ideas. Figuring out ways to make your house cooler, closing the shades during the day, opening the shade, the windows at night, trying to find ways, use fans to enhance the movement of air to kind of promote that evaporative cooling. And then that goes on to heat and work. As an occupational health and safety person, I also think of this a lot in the context of work where you have less control over whether you need to take a break, go to the shade, get some more water, go to the bathroom from drinking too much water. And so these are the situations where I think people are even at greater risk. So there are ways to make sure that people don't suffer from heat stress at work. And some of that is that acclimatization, if you're going to go into a hot job or a hot period, the balance of work and rest, of heat and cooling should be adjusted to allow yourself to get used to heat stress. Same thing, once again, hydration and that work rest schedule is really important. So the next slide. This is an upside down triangle you're seeing. Excellent. So this is actually something that NIOSH has on their website, if they're still in business, that when you're looking at a work problem, there's a way to address this. And the main, it's kind of putting as a highest priority, limiting the most hazardous exposure, in this case, heat. So that's why you have elimination. So if you can have a way to take people out of the most dangerous situation, that's the most effective. The least effective is personal protective equipment. So you send them back into a hot job, but with a cool, a wet scarf around their necks. Again, it's trying to prioritize the main ways of protecting people. And the next slide, please. And you're seeing another poster. This is once again kind of a way to kind of summarize what's heat stress, what's heat strain, and the ways to kind of avoid the most dangerous situations. And this isn't even about turf and some of the things that are new in our environment, but kind of the practical advice. And I kind of wanted to stop here, move to the next slide. We don't need to look at the poster, but take a little chance to kind of talk with each other about heat stress, heat strain. Have you ever been in a situation where you think you've been subject to heat strain or heat stress? How did you deal with it?
Elise?
Yes,
We have a question from Daphne, and I thought maybe, Daphne, you could ask it directly.
please do.
I'm retired, so it doesn't apply much anymore, but I remember in my older years teaching, it was so hot in the building. I experienced distress. And I wonder what's being done even now when it's even warmer about being in old school buildings without air conditioning.
I think this is, yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I know my grandson is in one of those Boston Public School buildings that's really old and has no ventilation system and no air conditioning. You know, it's interesting. I spent years trying to fight with the schools to actually open the windows and provide fans that provided outside air, because the risk of COVID was much greater when there was no ventilation and no outside air. So what the schools did, instead of kind of adding ventilation systems, they tried to deal with the heat stress problem first, and they closed the windows and they put air conditioners in, the only windows that could open. So you were trying to balance two separate problems: heat stress and a lack of outside air. There is a lot of actually data on test taking in too hot conditions. Students who take tests in too hot conditions do worse. And this has been documented, and it's like counterintuitive. We build our school buildings in ways that they don't promote learning. So what can we do? I think the solutions are much harder. You know, we're going to have to fight, especially while the federal government is falling apart, for our cities, towns to actually spend more time, energy on fixing the schools and building schools with ventilation that include heating and cooling. How many of you have been in classrooms that were too hot, or you had these effects? Yeah, I see your hands. You know, I think the work ahead of us is impressive and daunting.
Does anybody had experience with bargaining over unhealthy working and learning conditions in school buildings, particularly around heat and ventilation?
Great question.
Kathy?
Um, we've had issues in Cambridge Public Schools for years around air quality, and it's been an issue in bargaining over and over again. And I, it still continues to be an issue, and I don't really understand why. On the other hand, I see a lot of we've invested millions and millions of dollars into new school buildings that are um they look like fortresses, you know. There's like like they are air conditioned, but part of and I'm just extemporizing here, but I I really don't like air conditioning. I feel like if you're going in and out of air conditioned buildings and then into the heat and then into an air conditioned building and then back into the heat, that your body just goes wacko and can't really adjust. So I don't know if you'd want to talk about that, Elise. Like when I've traveled in hotter areas, I find my body adjusts to being in hotter, humid air, and so when it's 85 or 90 degrees, that feels kind of comfortable compared to 105 degrees or something like that. But it's, I don't know that air conditioning is the only answer.
I think air conditioning is one of the things that we need to cool off when people are working in really hot conditions. And I think as you talked about acclimatization, that you start getting used to it, I think this can be a more formal approach. In schools, I think we're going to need air conditioning, especially as global warming is moving hot zones further north and affecting kind of our schools even more. We have longer periods of heat, more heat days, more heat waves. So I know some people choose not to have air conditioning, but I think it's going to be necessary as we go forward.
Lisa Lemieux, who's the staff person for the Retired Members Committee, put a comment in about health and safety committees. Lisa, can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, that was some of the work that I was able to participate in Fall River, right? We had a massive mold issue. We shut down 2 schools right before summer break last year. And, you know, part of the problem was that, you know, the air conditioning system that they had in Fall River was so archaic that it couldn't keep up. It couldn't keep up with the problem. And, you know, being in New England, you know, the problem that they had is that the air conditions couldn't keep up, and it was, you know, more of a problem of the combination of heating and cooling with the humidity outside. And so and then they didn't keep up with the maintenance of the building, right? Over years of just not getting rid of the dust, and the proper maintenance and cleaning, you know, added to the problem. So, you know, like I said, some of our buildings, you know, with the pandemic and the additional funding, some of our cities and towns were able to add, you know, replace their air conditioning systems. Some were able to add windows. Some were able to build new buildings. And so it really is district by district, school by school. In Acushnet, on the other hand, you know, there is no place to build new buildings, you know, and they don't have the money. So it was really about putting containers in a place where they could temporarily put classrooms so that they could go repair the buildings that they had. So it really just comes down to the power of the union to go in and assess and negotiate what we need to do district by district to fix the problems that we have. But it is a serious problem, both for our kids, you know, in their learning conditions, as well as for our members in their working conditions. In Fall River, you know, it was when we finally had members who were testing, you know, positive for mold in their system, in their blood. right, was when we finally got the attention of the district, when we finally said enough is enough. People's, our kids and our teachers, medical conditions were being seriously impacted by the conditions of these buildings. And we finally got them to shut down 2 schools, and we physically had to, shift kids from one building to another building for summer school in order for us to properly shut down those schools for the summer to get them properly cleaned up throughout the summer. And that took a lot of money to be able to close it down and clean it up properly. And we had every single room tested, and it was because of the commitment of local delegates on the ground who did walkthroughs in every classroom on the floor, inspected every classroom and having to talk to each other to report things daily about what was happening, having to create a very serious health and safety committee. Every classroom is being tested on a regular basis now. And it takes a lot of commitment to make that happen.
Thank you.
The importance of facilities to education and to our own health and safety, and the role of the union in fighting for the very conditions that are good for staff, but also the best for the kids, is really important here. And everything from if the air conditioning system isn't built right, that water comes in the building and it increases the risk of mold. So you have those interacting also. So everything from turf to mold in the building are related to dealing with the heat stress and the global warming and the climate change that we're dealing with. And I see, Ora, you have your hand up too. So sorry, Dale, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, takes it in a very different place than Lisa was just talking about. But I spent 10 months in Liberia, which is really right on the equator, and in West Africa. It's horribly hot and incredibly humid. And even though I don't think I ever actually experienced either exhaustion or I definitely didn't experience heat stroke. It was so traumatizing for me to be in that environment that I have people who I'm close to back there who I would love to visit, but it is more daunting than I can deal with to actually consider going back, because it was just really kind of traumatic. I taught on air conditioning. I mean, there's almost no air conditioning there except for people like volunteers like me who kind of can't survive without it. So in our place we had it, but in the schools that I taught, there was none, and it was almost airless. And I would get in there and I would pick up my guitar, and within seconds I would be like drenched. So it can be very hard to deal with.
With your permission, I'd love to go back into the slides for a few minutes.
Elise,
And then
you have
break.
a hand raised for Phyllis.
Oh, okay. Yes, please, Phyllis.
Yeah, I was in the Galapagos in January, and I had a situation where we were on a walk. It wasn't even that long a walk, maybe a half an hour. And I suddenly hit a wall. I couldn't go any further. I couldn't think. They made me take off my shoes and my socks, sit down. They put a blanket up or a towel over me so the sun couldn't get to me, and I was fine within 20 minutes, but I really couldn't put two thoughts together.
Thank you. Back to you, Elise.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was, I think, the best example and summary of what can go wrong and how to deal with it that I could have asked for. Again, since I can't see what you're seeing, you saw just the description of someone talking about what heat stress looks like? Was it just words? Anne Marie, I think you have control of the sharing now or not?
Yeah, right now it says a Massachusetts worker heat fatality.
Thank you. That's where I want to be. Given that I'm an occupational health and safety person, I had to talk about work and heat. And this is not just schools. This is kind of the range of workers who are at the greatest risk. This was a heat fatality in Massachusetts in 2013. It was a letter carrier. and he was 45 years old. This was from an article in the MASCOSH, Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. There's a Worker Memorial Day every year, and this is one of the stories that MASCOSH told. And this worker knew he was in trouble. He texted his wife that morning saying, the heat is going to kill me. And it did. I mean, this is something that should not occur. But when people are at work, they have even less control over the conditions that might put them at risk or that might protect them. And next slide. This is again another recent study about not just in Massachusetts, this is nationwide. How many people are exposed on the job to heat? 4 in 10 are working in jobs that put them at risk of heat exposure. So this is data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which I think still exists, but it lets us know that there's a number of workers who have been at risk, and I think every reason to anticipate that more will be at the same risk. And the next slide. These are some other recent deaths nationwide. This is another letter carrier who died last year in Dallas. And in fact, heat was the second leading cause of death for letter carriers in the United States. And if you look, that's a picture on the right of a sanitation worker who died last year. And the city of Baltimore actually got a law firm to fight responsibility for his death. So both public sector and private sector employers have not responded well to this. The next 2 deaths that are described there were actually agricultural workers, immigrants, who were working in the fields and died from heat stress. And even our record keeping is at risk. In a study in Florida, it turns out they only had records of half of the heat deaths that occurred in last year, 2024. So this is an ongoing problem that's been underestimated. So if we can go to the next slide. This is just a reminder of who among workers are at the most risk. I think construction workers made up 1/3 of the heat deaths in the United States. But obviously landscaping, warehouse workers, where again, there's no air conditioning, bakers working near ovens, foundries, street repair. We talked about kind of those hard surfaces that may retain heat. Sanitation workers, as the death that I just said, Ron Silver in Baltimore, as well as truck drivers, and then the people who are actually responsible for some of installing air conditioners and roofing work and ventilation work. OSHA does not have a heat standard. I'm sure you've all been in situations where you think there ought to be a law, right, that protects the workers who are at the greatest risk. Efforts to pass an OSHA heat standard have been going on for years, and they were not successful. And now we're in bigger trouble on that front. If you can go to the next slide. This is just from a global perspective. Obviously, the United States is not the only place where people are at risk for heat stress. This is the ILO, International Labor Organization, that talked about 2.4 billion workers are in jobs that put them at risk from heat. And the ILO still exists. At least that's something that we may not lose. So if we can move to the next slide. I wanted to spend a little bit of time and kind of go through these fast. Why are we in this problem? So global warming, climate change is where some of the increased risk is coming from. So if we can go to the next slide, do you see causes of climate change? Okay, great, thanks. So the United Nations, these are, at the end of this presentation, are a bunch of the references I used. If you want to go back and look at more, I just wanted to let you know that there are some wonderful resources. This slide was just kind of their summary of some of the causes of climate change. Why are we in this situation? Why are things getting worse? So some of this is the use of fossil fuels, the actual burning. I know there's a big effort to move to electricity, which is safer and creates less greenhouse gases, which contribute to the climate heating that we're seeing. Manufacturing of certain certain products, cutting down forests. We know that trees, forests, leaves help reduce heat. They shield, they provide that shade. Just like getting out of the sun voluntarily, trees provide a place to do that. Transportation, they say cars are among the most important source of greenhouse gases, contributing to global warming, although now ships and air travel are certainly increasing. Agriculture, because of the clearing of the trees, contributes to global warming. Powering the biggest buildings, and of course, the richest of the nations and the richest of the people contribute more to this problem than the 50% of the world that's poorer. If you can move to the next slide. It's not just heat stress that climate change causes. So it's not just hotter temperatures, it's more severe storms. It's increased drought, although in some parts of the world, it's actually more wet. We'll have a map that shows that in the United States, but it's the kind of shifting of where these things are happening. The ocean is actually retaining the most heat globally, and the changes in the ocean are going to affect rising water and the risk of flooding. We have reduced biological diversity. We're losing species. There's not enough food to kind of feed our population. And so health risks are increasing. Next slide, please. Okay, are you seeing Maricopa? This is Phoenix, heat-related deaths over time. Yep. This was just kind of the evidence of how, and this is not work, this is just the people who live in Arizona. This is the area of Arizona with Phoenix, how the number of deaths from heat has gone up over the years from 2012 to 2022. Now, I told you that story about Chicago where there were 739 deaths. Most of those deaths were inside. They were inside dwellings. In Phoenix, in these 10 years, most of these deaths were outside. And most of these deaths were in urban areas, not out in rural areas. So we have heat islands where when you have pavement and buildings, actually we retain the heat and it doesn't cool off in the evenings. And so you have what are called heat islands. And that also raises the overall temperature that people are subject to. So the next slide is just one more indication. This is from EPA, which hopefully still exists. that the number of heat days and the number of heat waves has gone up over the last 10 years. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. So when we think about who's at risk, we talked about elderly, we talked about workers, it's unclear to me when the deaths among older people, how much of it is aging itself, or is it the social determinants of health? It's whether people are poor. Older people are more likely to have underlying health problems. They may not have the money for air conditioning or have air conditioning. They don't have the ways to cool off that they need. They live in the places with the heat islands, and it could be that's what puts them most at risk. Okay, if we can move to the next slide. All right, do you see a map? Okay. This is kind of a series of maps from the EPA that were letting us know how things are changing with climate change, with global warming. And what I thought was interesting in this first one, which is about drought, actually, the United States has been getting wetter. And if you see, it's kind of where drought is occurring and where the greater wet conditions are occurring is different. It's like we have to become, I think, ready to respond to disasters, different kinds of disasters at different times and in different ways. So you see out west, the drought is increasing, and in the Northeast where we are, it's getting wetter. And that is partially the unpredictability of what these global changes in climate. If you look at the next slide, this is wildfires. And we heard, the California wildfires last year, the Canadian wildfires. This is predicting, you see a little A? This is the area where it's going to become the epicenter of wildfires in the years to come. And this is large wildfires that affect 12,000 acres or more. So, I find some of the global effects terrifying. But if we move on to the next, these are the recent fires. This is from North and South Carolina that are just happening last month. That's showing you the Rattlesnake Branch fire. And the next slide is from the same fire. It's just letting us know that these conditions are continuing. And the next one is another map. This is talking about the effects on agriculture. It turns out corn and soy are our biggest products, and they're really important economically, and they are more sensitive to heat than drought. And what's actually happening is the ability for North Dakota to grow corn and soy is going to increase. And at the same time, Texas and Oklahoma are going to lose their agricultural capacity by 70%. So the impact of these shifting conditions are going to affect us in so many different ways. And I want to go to the next slide, which is overwhelming, and we're not going to talk about it too much. FEMA has actually put together a map that looked at 18 different natural hazards that can affect us from climate change. And it kind of looks at a combination of what can go wrong and the social vulnerability of that community and the resilience, community resilience. So I would, encourage you to look at some of these different maps if you want to know more about how climate change can impact us. The next slide again is a story. you know, since we talked about flooding is another one of the impacts from climate change. This was the rising water in Tennessee, and there was flooding going on. And in one particular company, this plastics company, Impact Plastics, they tried to keep the workers there while the water was rising. And their delay in allowing the workers to leave resulted in 6 deaths of the employees at Impact Plastics. So once again, kind of workers at kind of greater vulnerability because they have less control over their workplace. Okay, the next slide. Again, just one more summary. This has been the hottest decade in history. Last year was the hottest year on record. We can go to the next slide. All right, we've kind of talked about this. Oceans are rising. We have things like coffee production is decimated in Brazil. Asthma and allergies are increasing because of the different amounts of heat and sun and growing periods. So the impact is great. And I kind of wanted to go through the disastrous findings quick and stop here because I think the next thing we can spend the next hopefully 10 minutes talking about, and if you can change to the next slide, is what can we do? If we can take a break and then just think about this a little bit together. What can we do as individuals? What can we do in our communities? We talked a little bit about bargaining and the role that the union can play, legislative efforts, mass movements. So anyone want to talk a little bit about our response to these kind of global changes and what we can do?
Elise, we've had a couple of entries from Martha and from Edwina about the turf issue, that what it means to organize as a community around conditions at our schools that are potentially dangerous. So maybe Martha and Edwina, you could bring that discussion to the fore.
Hi. Let me.
Right.
Hi.
There is a initiative going on in our community, and it's very divided. As as Martha was saying, there are parents who believe that artificial turf is the be-all and end-all, and it's absolutely essential for athletes to have this to be competitive. And yet, I work on a committee that has physicists and all kinds of people who are very, very knowledgeable about the toxins that are in it, particularly PFAS, that affect our air, they affect our water, they certainly affect the heat. They do create heat islands as well. And in our situation, one of these fields is within the buffer area of a watershed that goes into the Ipswich River. And so we've been doing a lot of research. We've been working with our conservation committee. We've been working with the Board of Health. We've been working with a woman who is a real expert in the field and has actually been litigating and is giving us a lot of information relative to what other communities are doing to deal with this situation. A lot of them have the watershed concerns or the environmental concerns, and that's been really helpful. And relative to what you can do, I find that working within your community to begin with can be very helpful if it's affecting your community. But we're also working with our legislators and you know, are working on encouraging them to support and promote legislation that may make it illegal eventually. It takes time, and they almost got it accomplished this year, but they ran out of time to really ban artificial turf for youth, because they're also, from a health standpoint, they're finding connections between youth having endocrine issues and cancers and different kinds of things from exposure to the toxins just playing on these fields. And our legislators are aware of it. I think we're fortunate to be living in Massachusetts because we're that much further ahead of things than other states, for sure. But there is a lot of opposition that we're dealing with too. People who want to deny that any of this is really an issue to be concerned about. So that's what that's been my experience.
If I can add to that, I tried to fight the addition to turf to my granddaughter's elementary school in Boston and lost that fight. The schools, because they have less maintenance expenses and requirements, they like it. But another argument to add is they are associated with more injuries to the athletes who compete on artificial turf.
That's true. That's true. And they're saying that it is less expensive and easier to maintain, but that's not true either. And we are presenting the alternative of organic fields, because regular fields take a hit, particularly with football. But there's a lot of evidence to show that organic fields, once they're established, are very long lasting and much more affordable. And you know, you have to do your maintenance, but when you crunch all the numbers, it's much more affordable. But again, a lot of people don't want to hear it, and I know there are a lot of communities losing this fight right now.
Yeah, no, and from a global warming perspective, it's again taking away green and growing and natural cooling capacity if you add artificial turf as opposed to.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
Any other comments about, I have a few more slides, but they really are different efforts to kind of pay attention to heat stress, heat strain, and you know what people are trying to do.
Lisa, I believe you said that we have a new Safe Schools Committee. Can you say more about that, and if people are interested, how they might get involved in that?
Yeah, the Safe Schools Committee, they've been meeting regionally for the last year or so. And now they've come together. They were at the last conference. There was the last two conferences, I think they've met. And I think Andre, like, there's actually been funding. I think it was a new business. What do you guys call that? The MBI, right? There's been some votes on that and funding allocated for that. And there was a staff person appointed to that. And so it is a big focus, and a lot of it has been really focused around the behavior in our schools. So it's not just about like health and safety around right, the conditions of our schools and this stuff, right? It's a all around compass about what what the different things that are needed. So um so it but it's like what are the different issues in our schools, from behavior and staffing, as well as the climate issues and the building issues. So they are working on surveys that are going out to all our members about that. And then Scott Fulmer and our whole health and safety division is part of that group as well. So there'll be a lot. They actually did a whole health and safety manual and guide that they're working on. There should be a lot coming from that. We really encourage people to participate.
So if one wants to participate, how would one do that?
I don't remember the staff person's name that was brought on to, we can find out and get that information out.
Great.
I know
Elise?
Melissa Ribello is the person from the Zero office, and Mary Ellen something is the person from the other region, but
Alderwood.
yeah, but there was another staff person that was recently hired and charged with overseeing the whole health and safety process. And I don't know her name, but I will find out.
Thank you. Elise, I'm going to turn it back to you to do your last few slides.
Okay. Next slide has Boston Initiative. Do you see that? Great, thank you. So, I just wanted to kind of highlight a few things that are going on that I think are moving us in the right direction. There are certain electricity suppliers that are spending more time on the more, less likely to use fossil fuels, the safer sources for electricity. Next slide. There's a City of Boston ordinance to protect workers who are working on city contracts. So there's some legislation, local ordinances that protect workers in certain communities. That might be something worth doing. Next slide. There's a Massachusetts Senate bill that would address heat stress, but it's only for outdoor workers. It doesn't protect indoor workers, and it's only public sector workers. So some of these efforts are baby steps and maybe not enough in the right direction. Next slide should be, again, just a reminder about heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Do you see that? Okay. The next two slides are just references. If you want to go back to any of the technical and scientific articles that you can look at to think about. But if you go beyond those two references, there's one that says organizations and resources. Do you see the organizations and resources slide? I wanted to highlight that not only is the union doing things to kind of negotiate and protect, staff and children, educators and children, but there's a number of organizations that work hard on different aspects of global climate change. Certainly, I want to highlight MASCOSH, the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. Our Worker Memorial Day is coming up April 28th. The death of the letter carrier to me is another reminder that workers are at grave danger from heat stress. And it's one way to say that workers should be protected. But you'll see also a number of different organizations, 350.org, Third Act, which is mainly older activists. Bill McKibben works with Third Act. The Sunrise Movement, those are mainly younger activists. BCAN, Boston Climate Action Network, and Massachusetts Climate Action Network. Extinction Rebellion, that's what that picture is from. These are younger rebellion, really, I think the fighters who are willing to kind of put their lives on the line to protect our globe. Mothers Out Front,